Well, let's analyse this further now with Ulrich Brueckner. He's a professor of European Studies at Stanford University in Berlin. Great to have you back with us, Professor. Judging by the initial responses we've seen from the European leaders after this summit in Washington, they're broadly happy with the outcome. There was a lot of nervousness leading into this meeting because of Trump's meeting with Putin on the Friday before. What's your view? Do they have reason to feel a bit more upbeat about the situation when it comes to the Ukraine war?
Well, of course, it all depends on what the expectations are. If after the very symbolic meeting in Alaska, people thought, well, basically nothing has changed, there is no ceasefire, there is no execution of sanctions against Russia, and we just keep on going, the next move was to hear about there is a chance of negotiating a peace agreement. And this could point in a direction that is kind of the worst case scenario for Europeans, that an agreement between Trump and Putin would mean that we go back to the days when power players make deals on the expense of third parties, which in this case is Zelensky and the European security order, which in essence is what Putin is aiming for. So given that this didn't happen, there is a sigh of relief, at least on those who felt the immediate threat from what could have happened in the worst case scenario, but we are far from an improvement.
One of the significant outcomes of this meeting seems to be this idea that the US supports the idea of security guarantees for Ukraine. We know it's something that Ukraine and other European powers had been pushing for. We don't know what exactly this security guarantee would look like, but Zelensky says over the next 10 days or so, the details might emerge of this mechanism. How in your view, would this security guarantee look like, given the fact that Trump seems to be opposed to NATO acting as that security guarantor?
Well, everyone who gives an interpretation of what security guarantees might look like is rather talking about him or herself. We don't know this, and Putin certainly has a different understanding compared with what Witkoff said, that it is close to Article 5, as if Ukraine could be a NATO member without being a NATO member. If this is one of the initial reasons why Putin started the war, it will certainly not the end to have NATO troops being positioned right next to the new Russian border. And Putin presents this as a success story to his people in Russia. I don't really see this coming. But the bigger picture is that Trump doesn't want to lose Russia in what is for him the most top priority in his struggle with China. Because the longer the war is ongoing, the more Russia becomes dependent on China, which is already providing 80% of dual-use goods and is buying cheap energy from Russia that other parts of the world stopped buying or become more and more reluctant in doing so. So this growing dependency is the opposite of what Trump wants. So as committed he might have been in the past to be part on the Western side of the globe, he is more looking into what are the short-term goals in becoming friends with Russia. And this is dangerous not only for Ukraine, but for the European security architecture.
We know in previous conflict zones, UN peacekeeping forces have been deployed in order to essentially guarantee security and peace in those regions. I'm thinking of forces in Lebanon, for example. There's also a force that's active in Cyprus right now, as well as one between Egypt and Israel. But we know that previous US administrations, as well as the current one, have been very much against the idea of US boots on the ground in terms of the Ukraine war. What might that look like, do you think, in this security guarantee mechanism? Will it be, or could it be in the form of a peacekeeping force?
Well, peacekeeping force doesn't necessarily need to be boots on the ground and defending the first line of potential conflict. This was something Trump made very clear in his short interpretation of what security guarantees might imply. So yes, there is a need for Europeans to be present to defend Ukrainian territory if this is the final deal. But one can also think of other parts of the world being engaged. Russia suggested that China could be an option, which would be very much against the Chinese general line of not being physically engaged in any conflict in the world. But who knows, maybe we are surprised by whatever comes next, as we have been with ceasefire, no ceasefire, peace agreement, and now reflecting on what the practical outcome of guaranteeing troops would look like.
Okay, Professor Ulrich Brueckner, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much again for joining us on the program.